Tokyo can very easily be overwhelming. It's associated with a handful of superlatives like the most populous city in the world, home to the busiest train station, or the busiest street crossing. The Tokyo of today is the result of centuries of development and the combination of a bunch of settlements. So I want to focus in on the foundation of where all this began. Let's take just a second to get oriented. The city sits right here, on the eastern coast of Japan next to Tokyo Bay. Zooming out a bit, you can see it lies along the Pacific Rim in what's known as the Ring of Fire. This is the edge of a tectonic plate, and it's along this rim where 80% of the world's seismic activity and 75% of the world's volcanic activity occurs, both of which characterize Japan. Due to the earthquakes and volcanoes, 3/4 of Japan is mountainous. However, the basin that Tokyo sits in is unusually flat. In my mind, it was inevitable that this spot would be home to a major city. Another important element of understanding the city is its water. There are 4 major rivers that run down from the mountains through the city and empty into the bay. The combination of these and the topography of the city make it very prone to flooding. This, plus a devastating bombing during World War II, means that it can be hard to find old buildings in downtown Tokyo. But what does remain is much of the original street layout. This is a topographical map of Tokyo. If I zoom in, you can see these unnatural waterways that are part of the current city. These were built hundreds of years ago to serve as a moat for a castle that stood here, Edo Castle. Today, the Imperial Palace stands on these grounds, and the surrounding greenery is a great anchor point when looking at a current map of the city. The year 1603 marks the beginning of the Edo period, when a new ruler came into power and moved the military capital of Japan from Kyoto to Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo. Okay, before I get too deep into these maps of Tokyo, I want to thank Surfshark for sponsoring this video. If you travel a lot, you probably use a lot of public internet, like airport Wi-Fi or coffee shops or Airbnbs or hostels or hotels. And this internet, if you're linked to it without any protection, you're very vulnerable to hackers and spammers and scammers. But if you have Surfshark and you turn your VPN on, it protects you against all of that and protects your privacy and your data. Personally, I don't travel without using my VPN. With your one account of Surfshark, you can use it across all of your devices, so it can be on your iPad, your phone, and your laptop, all while you're traveling. I also actually use Surfshark at home for swapping out my physical location for a digital private network that will show that I'm in Canada or in Portugal, even though I'm in the United States. This allows me to access content on sites like Netflix that isn't available in my region. The Office, I'm looking at you. If you sign up for Surfshark and you use the code BrightTrip, you can get 83% off and 3 months for free. And if you don't like the service, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. The link for this is under the like button at the top of the description, and we will hop into our video about Tokyo. In videos I've made of other cities, there's often a clear pattern to the street layout. In New York, for example, there was the 1811 Commissioner's Plan that laid the city out in the clean grid of streets and avenues. In San Francisco, I talked about how the streets are named after states in alphabetical order. But Tokyo is much more complex and irregular than most Western cities. There are portions like this that are pretty close to a grid system, but other parts are completely irregular. And not only do many of these streets lack a pattern, but more often than not, they also lack a name. As someone mostly familiar with Western cities, this blew my mind. But it doesn't mean there isn't a reason and a method behind the streets and their addresses. Let me explain. Until about 150 years ago, Japan had a very clear caste system. And this social structure had a large influence on where people lived and how each neighborhood functioned. If you lived in a lower caste as a commoner, you would live in much more tightly packed neighborhoods that resulted in something closer to a grid system, like this area right here. If you were in the military, you would have lived closer to the shogun, and you would have more land. And if you were a lower level samurai, you would live east of the shogun, since east is viewed as the unlucky direction in feng shui. And something else becomes a lot more clear when we overlay the topographical map. You can see that this same neighborhood is in this green-blue area, meaning it's lower in elevation.
A lot of the area that's sort of light blue was actually still water back in the 16th century when Edo was first being developed. And so you really had the castle kind of on the edges of Tokyo Bay.
This is Michael Thornton, who's an assistant professor of history at Northeastern University.
Is that that's the original map?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And he helped me understand a little bit of how this works. Tokyo can be divided into the high city and the low city. On the tops of the hills, these red areas, buildings are less vulnerable to floods and earthquakes. So this is where people of higher class built. Then, as the city grew, the lower places filled in with commoners.
So all these areas over here that are below sea level are the poorest districts of Tokyo in 2023.
These moats, visible on both old maps of Edo and current maps of Tokyo, are another example of how the city was different from the start. Rather than a strong city wall, this acted as the main defense.
Having a big grid with open, wide avenues is not great for defending the place. There was never really any wall building. Instead, it's kind of the confusing street system and all the moats and this sort of interlocking pattern. Those were used as the defensive mechanisms rather than a wall.
Portions of it have been covered by roads, but if you know what to look for when you're walking around in the area, you can actually find stones from the original moat. Some of them have plaques that talk a little bit more about it, and I found this YouTube video of this guy that walks all over Tokyo and just shows stuff like this, so you should check out his channel. It's really cool. In fact, Sotobori Dori, right here, means outer moat avenue. And this neighborhood, Maronotsi, means within the circle. These are some of the many elements of this old Edo that still surface in modern-day Tokyo. As Edo was built, so was a network of 5 long roads stretching across much of Japan, called Gokaido, that connected the country as it unified for the first time in centuries. These 5 roads all merged right here at Nihonbashi Bridge. Most of the original roads are gone, along with the original wooden bridge, but today a bridge by the same name still stands in this place, and serves as the point that all places in Japan are measured from. Because of its position on the bay and the moats around the city that could be utilized for transport, it really was more a place of commerce than it ever was for defense. While Edo was never really attacked by outsiders, it didn't avoid large-scale destruction. In 1657, a huge fire burned through most of the city. At the time, the residents were required to live within the moat boundary, so it was tightly packed and over 100,000 people died. This fire had a huge impact on the city. The shogun allowed the residents to begin to spread out to the other side of the moat, beginning an expansion that wouldn't stop for hundreds of more years. Also, just a quick side note, almost every video I've made, a massive citywide fire has played a role. Chicago, New York, San Francisco. I was also in Lisbon last summer, and a bunch of the buildings have these like fireproof walls that are really important there. It just makes me think a lot about fire policies. Fire escapes were implemented, building materials. Anyway, back to Edo. Unfortunately, this was not the only destruction to strike the city. It continued to expand by building, but also by incorporating nearby settlements, which added to the randomness of the roads. In 1923, a 7.9 earthquake devastatingly shook the entire city. And more than just the shaking, the fires that followed once again leveled the city. A few decades later, most of the buildings were destroyed again by US bombing during World War II. When you look for information about Tokyo, you'll quickly find things about the metro system, about World War II, the post-war miracle, and the hosting of the Olympics. But the small foundation and ancient social structure of this sprawling metropolis still pulls weight in where people live in the city and how it's organized.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. We have an entire guide to Tokyo on brighttrip.com where we talk all about how ramen is made, how you can order sushi, how to travel there with kids, the nightlife, the shopping, public transportation, tons of info over there. We'll see you at brighttrip.com. I also left a bunch of links in the description for resources I used for making this video that I highly recommend checking out, as well as the Surfshark 83% off and 3 months free link. So that's all under the like button.
and we'll see you in the next video very soon. Peace.